Anyone else want to record to your computer? Surjit, okay. So welcome everyone. Shannon, I heard back from a few students who were very excited for this opportunity. So it's clearly something that's on a lot of people's minds. And I guess part of what we're going to talk about today is how to get it off their minds. But I'll let you speak to that. So again, welcome and take it away.
Thank you. Thanks, Avi. I really appreciate the invitation through Victor as well to join you. I've never been to one of these sessions. I'm not totally sure how they go, but I'm happy to introduce myself and see what service I can be of in the conversation today. My name is Shannon Renard Demko. I'm based in Atlanta in the US, although today I'm in Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic. In case you're thinking that's a very nice living room, it is, and it's not mine, and I'm not responsible for how nicely it's decorated. um, but I have been working in the graduate admissions space for about 20 years. I spent about 10 years as an admissions committee member and then a director of admissions at Emory University's Gosweda Business School in Atlanta and at American University in Washington, D.C. And then in 2013, I made a transition into admissions coaching. In my day job, aside from Mindful MBA, I actually work as the senior director of a program called MBA Prep, which is a US based, it's in an organization called MLT, or Management Leadership for Tomorrow. It's a US based diversity nonprofit that supports diverse individuals on their path to senior business leadership. So I run an nonprofit admissions coaching program and also do admissions coaching on my own through Mindful MBA. Which I also founded in 2013. And so those things are somewhat concurrent. It's becomes harder and harder to encapsulate all the things that I do, but I'll lean into the Mindful MBA side, saying that now for since 2013, I've been working on the other side of the admissions table with applicants, advising them on all aspects of their MBA and graduate business applications. And so I think one of the biggest transitions that I made there was seeing the GMAT or the GRE through the eyes of the test taker instead of the admissions committee, and being on the journey with the applicant instead of as the admissions committee member, just encouraging them to do well and hopefully you'll meet our average. So hopefully we can admit you. Now I'm in it, and I have been now for almost 9 years. What happened when I started coaching is that, again, for almost 20 years, I've been an avid practitioner of yoga and of mindfulness and meditation. And almost immediately, I started to realize how my own personal practices could probably benefit the individuals that I was working with. And in very short time, I founded Mindful MBA really as an opportunity to continue the conversation that I was having with the individuals I was coaching. At the end of the advising call, minute 59 of a 60-minute call, we would have talked about essays, and we talked about interview prep and personal clarity. And they would say, wait, but can we talk about that breathing stuff you do? Or can we talk about that? And I would say, I would love to, but we're out of time. And now I have somebody else. So Mindful MBA started as a blog that I would post, and all the posts are still there. I think there's hundreds of posts from years of me saying, this is the rest of the conversation, how you can use mindfulness to prepare for your interview, how you can use it to prepare for the GMAT or GRE, how you can use it as an MBA student to manage things like imposter syndrome and indecision and jealousy and working with difficult team members and things like that. It all works together. And so from there, I started having opportunities to work with organizations around mindfulness, doing mindfulness trainings, often in the MBA space, but not exclusively, sometimes in the business space. I work with business schools, I work with companies, and I work with individuals. And that really is, for me, my most satisfying work, is the opportunity to work with individuals at any part of their admissions journey, but utilizing mindfulness and imparting some of the wisdom that is present in these thousands of years old techniques that support us in a very real way in our everyday lives to move in the direction that we feel compelled to move in. For everybody on this call, I assume that direction is pursuing a graduate business degree. But whatever it is, if you change your minds later, mindfulness is still there for you. And it helps us get out of our own way, and realize what it is that's kind of going on in here that's preventing us from taking the knowledge we have and externalizing it to get it on the board, get the score that you can actually get, or whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. So I guess in summary, I'm an admissions coach. I'm also a career coach at this point. I'm a yoga teacher. I have a 500-hour certification with Yoga Alliance. I'm a meditation and mindfulness instructor. I did my training at the Center for Koryu Mindfulness at Duke University in 2015. And I'm someone who's just really passionate about bringing these tools into this space. And I really do see myself as being of service in doing that. Because once you learn them, they're yours, for life. And the journey takes itself from there, That was a very long introduction, Avi.
No, Shannon, that was perfect. And I'm going to open this up to everyone to ask you questions because I'm sure they have many. But before I do that, I just want to say one thing and ask one thing, and then we'll open it up. So the one thing I wanted to say is I love that you call it mindful MBA, and I love that the whole thing is called mindfulness because to me, the biggest difference between success and failure in the GMAT is whether you approach it in a mindful way, and I'm talking about approaching each individual question or each passage in reading comprehension, whatever it is that we're looking at, we can approach it mindfully or we can approach it mindlessly. And a big part of what we do here at Quant Reasoning is bringing the mindfulness in kind of instead of algebra, long addition, long subtraction, long multiplication, and long division, which of course are all very mindless procedures that we memorized as children and now we just execute without really thinking about why it works or what are the concepts or principles that allow it to work. And the thing is that the GMAT is really cleverly set up to test those very principles, which we don't think about when we're operating mindlessly. So I just wanted to kind of put that in there. And I'll also say that when I really started believing that mindfulness can make a difference for people is when I saw my own students taking the GMAT twice without any studying in between those two attempts with 1 to 200 point difference in their outcomes. So let me just say that one more time. More than 100-point difference in the score on two attempts without any studying in between. So you got to ask yourself, well, how is that possible? Right? What's driving that difference? And that's kind of how I came to realize that there's a lot more going on here beyond learning the Pythagorean theorem or something like that. And that's when I realized that I on my own am not enough for most students because I'm not a mindfulness professional. I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a therapist. There's another aspect to this that I can't cover. So that was the one thing I wanted to say. The question I have for you is if you could speak just a little bit more about what is mindfulness. You mentioned imposter syndrome, you mentioned jealousy, and as you mentioned those things, all these past students of mine come into my mind, and I can visualize their faces, and I know exactly what you're talking about. But for the rest of the people here, if you could just maybe give a couple of anecdotes or an example of what that really means, because I think for a lot of us, mindfulness is a very amorphous word. We don't really understand what that is.
Yeah, that's a great question, Avi, and thank you for it. So I intentionally use the word mindfulness and words mindfulness and meditation separately, because there are some types of meditation that are also mindfulness practices and some that are less so. And there are types of mindfulness practices that don't look anything like meditation, right? And so one of the things, if not the singular thing that unites mindfulness practices, is that we work with an anchor in mindfulness. So mindfulness doesn't presume that we can stop the thoughts of the brain, that we can stop the brain from being distracted and interested in what's going on both outside of us and also inside of us. It leads with the idea that your brain thinks like your ears hear, or your eyes see, or your skin feels, to the extent that they function fully. it's an organ, and it does what it does. And that we can either choose to be intentional about what it does or not. We can just let it do its thing and follow and go along on the ride. So all mindfulness practices have an anchor, which is something that we come back to when we get distracted. So the presumption you will probably get distracted is there, right? You come back to it. In many cases, that is the breath. In many cases, it isn't. But we can start with that because we all have it with us right now. We're all doing it. And it's one of the few things that the body does that is both voluntary and involuntary. Meaning if you forget about it, as long as you're alive, it will keep happening. If you want to control it, you can then do that. Another one is blinking, by the way. And now that I said that, you're all going to be like, blink. But blinking just happens. But if you want to blink, you can also do that, right? So if we work with breath, all that means is that there's a variety of ways that we could work with breath, is simply that you're paying attention on purpose to what's happening with your breath, and then without judgment. And that's the hard part, and we'll get to that. And that definition of mindfulness, I borrowed from a guy named Jon Kabat-Zinn, he's written prolifically about mindfulness. He's a New Englander in the United States, and has a number of centers and things like that around mindfulness. And that's his definition: paying attention on purpose to the present moment and non-judgmentally. And I love that because it defies what a lot of people think mindfulness or meditation might be. So you think it's about checking out. If I'm feeling stressed, I have to get away from all the stresses of the world or whatever it is, so that I can be blissful and free of distraction and float on a cloud or something. But mindfulness says, no, we're going to plug into exactly what's happening right now, so that we begin to exclude what isn't. And what's interesting about the way our brains work is that where they usually are is not here. So our thoughts are usually about the past, about the future, or in our imagination. We're envisioning a possible. So there's planning for the future, and then there's envisioning what might happen in the future. And that might be exciting and fun, or it might be really scary, right? But they are often not right where you are right now and nowhere else. And so mindfulness just tries to bring us back to like what's actually happening right now. And then to begin to see this current experience through the eyes of an observer. So mindfulness operates with the idea that there is a thinking mind and an observing mind. So if I asked you right now to picture whatever you last ate, right? Picture what it was. You can be like, okay, I'm picturing it. And the fact that you can tell me what you see in your mind is an example of the fact that you can observe your thoughts, right? You can observe what they are. What are you thinking about? You tell me, well, I'm thinking about what I ate recently. So there is space between our experience and our witnessing of it. And I know that sounds a little woo-woo right now, and I try to start in not such a woo-woo place, but that's important to think about in the context of the GMAT or the GRE as well, right? Any sort of standardized exam, is that you can be having a stressful experience. And then the moment you realize, oh, I'm having a stressful experience, instead of being like, oh, I'm having a stressful experience. Well, what this means is that this test is not going to go well. And what that means is that I'm going to have to take it again, maybe, or I don't even have time. And I'm probably not going to get into school. If I don't get into school, my family's going to be disappointed. And like, all of this is happening in a 10-second time period in a testing center or in front of your laptop at home. And really what's going on is that you're sitting in front of a screen that has a question on it. And that's it. That's actually the only thing that's happening. And even better, it's a type of question you've probably literally seen thousands of times before. There's nothing scary about that at all, actually, unless you decide there is and tell yourself a story about that you're being threatened, that you are in danger in this situation, right? In fact, it should be one of the most boring things that any of you, given how much you've practiced, should be one of the most boring things you do. Or it can be fun. Ooh, a new question. I don't know if I've seen exactly this one before, right? It can be what you decide it is. But ultimately with mindfulness, I'll go back to the original question, Avi, because I could talk about this for days, which is why I'm glad to be here. But is mindfulness is any activity that brings you back, gives you an anchor and brings you back to the present moment. So it can be breathing. You can meditate on, here I have a lip gloss, right? I could meditate on this. I could do a grounding exercise with this about like color and shape and weight in my hands. If I'm bringing all of my focus onto this thing in front of me, right, then I'm doing mindfulness. When I'm doing yoga, I'm doing mindfulness. Because if any of you happen to practice yoga, you know that like the teacher will always say, where's your breath? Come back to your breath. Do you feel your feet on the ground? Do you feel this? Like, what are you feeling? They'll bring you back into your body over and over again instead of, oh, I got to stop at the store on the way home and I forgot to call my mom back and all that stuff that comes into the brain. The last piece of the equation, the definition that's challenging, is the non-judgmental part. Because judgment is our launching pad. Judgment is what sends us all out into the future, into the past, right? So, okay, I got distracted. I see that I'm coming back, but then there's the story about what I think is now happening here and what it means and how it goes and who I am and whether I'm good enough for this and whether I'm ready for this and whether I've prepared enough for this. And that's supportive, like recognizing that and just seeing it instead of being in the midst of it, right? If you're able to see the story the same way that you saw the distraction, then you realize it's just a distraction, right? So the story is just another distraction. The same as any loud noise that scares you. If the room is quiet and then there's a loud noise, right? The same way, like any external thing can be a distraction, the inside can be a distraction as well. Because if I use the example, the dramatic example I offered of the person who's taking the exam and gets a hard question or realizes that they're behind time, and then the story begins of, well, this whole exam is a mess now and the whole process is over and my career is over and my life is over and whatever, that's internal distraction. And the question I would ask in that moment is that true? Do you know that's true? No, what actually happened? Oh, I noticed the question is challenging. Oh, I noticed I'm a couple minutes behind where I want to be. You disrupt the flow of that thought and just bring yourself back to the present and go forward instead of going that way. I'll stop. There's a lot to be said on this. And the reason I'm so passionate about it, again, is because it's so incredibly useful on the GMAT, but it's also so incredibly useful in so many other spaces, right? And I will say that the thing that is so powerful about it, like I love that it can be used to help you achieve a particular goal, right? Like getting a top score on the GMAT. But if you keep doing this work, and I'll talk about, recommendations that I have for practices and things like that. If you keep doing it, eventually you learn how to sit with yourself in all kinds of situations without being afraid of whatever it is that's coming up. Recognizing that emotions are neurochemical experiences that we have and we can't avoid it. Someone says something that upsets you, question pops up that scares you because it looks hard at first. Somebody, a car honks at you in traffic, these things are upsetting and you're going to have that chemical response in your body, but it's what happens next that makes all the difference, right? And it's not being afraid to be uncomfortable or angry or scared and just being like, oh, this showed up. Okay. The cool thing about emotions is that chemical experience of feeling an emotion passes through the human body in about 90 seconds. But how many of you have been angry for longer than 90 seconds before? Why? Because you start writing the story. I can't believe she said that. You know what? She always says stuff like this, and I'm tired of it. I'm going to, or you could just be like, well, that made me angry, and see what happens next. And you can say, here's the cool thing is that we're not trying to become, monks or ascetic, anything like that. We're trying to be human. But isn't it preferable, at least to me, it's preferable that if someone says something that upsets me, I would like to respond from a place of calm. Even if what I'm about to say is that upset me and it's not okay. right? Versus like, wow, you say the first thing that comes to your mind and then you've just made it worse instead of better, and you regret what you said. And, you know, we respond with intention. Even if we decide we're going to honk back in traffic, we do it on purpose instead of in a way that we end up regretting.
So I have a quick question. So I know when I took the GMAT, I got a very difficult passage, and my confidence was pretty much shot because I think it was a difficult RC. And normally with RCs, at least I get a sense of, I don't know, whenever I do an RC, I normally get a good sense, not a good sense, but at least I get a basic understanding of the passage. But in this case, when I read through the passage and I was at the very end of the passage, I didn't even know what I read. And that's when I started panicking, because I know that there's going to be 3 or 4 questions, and I've never experienced something like that. And that's when I started panicking, and I think that's what really tanked my score. Are you, I was just curious, I don't know if you have done the GMAT yourself. What was, I'm, I was just curious, how would you deal with something like that in case you're not sure what to do, you're not experienced it before on the exam, you know you have only 60 seconds per question. Yeah, I'm hoping to apply for admissions, the deadlines. I don't know how many times I want to redo this test. Why wouldn't you panic, I suppose?
That's a great question, Jaideep, and thank you for asking. So I think a couple of things came to mind. First, it's okay to have that response. You can't control it. You've never seen this before. You're in a situation that you care a lot about, right? So there's this whole line of research that talks about stress. The way you perceive stress actually impacts the way your body handles the stress. And so one of the things that you can remind yourself of going into an official GMAT is this is my chance to present myself, to show an admissions committee how much I know. This is a part of the process that gets me into business school. Because what starts happening when you feel a sense of purpose, not of fear, not of obligation, but of purpose, like, oh, this is a building block in a really great application that I'm working on. Your brain maps to someone who's experiencing joy and courage instead of someone who's experiencing fear or anxiety. But to answer your specific question, acknowledge that, like, okay, oh, this is new. That's okay. Here's something that I want all of you to know is that nothing is going to happen in the GMAT that is not okay for you. Nothing is going to happen that is not okay, right? So the stress response that you're having is the same stress response that our ancestors had that enabled them to, most of our ancestors all around the world lived a lot closer to nature than I'm assuming most of us do right now. And they needed this really incredible thing our bodies can do called fight, flight, or freeze so that they could survive in nature, so that they could jump high and run fast and lift heavy things and evade predators. We don't have to do that, especially not when we're taking the GMAT, but the same response is happening. Okay. And what we want to do is shift the body out of that and back into its normal operating state, which is called rest and digest. It's the opposite of fight, flight, or freeze. Okay. So first of all, the thing happens and you're like, whew, that's scary. Okay. Got it. The best thing that you can do in that situation is meet the body with the body. Okay. So instead of the clock is ticking, right? Remind yourself, I'm okay. This is okay. No matter what it is, this is okay. It is words on a screen. It is not a tiger chasing me. I'm not in danger here. The GMAT can do a lot of things, but it cannot kill you, literally, right? So this is okay. I'm okay. Take a deep breath. In through the nose, out through the mouth. If you can do that 3 times, perfect. If you can do it 1 time, perfect. So we talked about breath as being something that's both voluntary and involuntary. When you are in fight, flight, or freeze, the breath is not voluntary. It's shortened. It's designed to help you access immediate energy, right? To help your muscles activate and things like that. A deep breath is the opposite. When you introduce that into your body gets the information that we do not need to be in fight, flight, or freeze. Doesn't matter what your brain's saying. Tell the body, meet the body with the body, and take a deep breath. If you can make it 3, make it 3. Not like that. That's hyperventilation, right? But we want to breathe, ideally to a count of 3 or 4. And as you exhale, just soften your body down towards the chair. You do it again. These deep breaths, they stimulate the vagus nerve, which runs from the base of your brain all the way down your spine, right? And it lets your body know, okay, wait, we're going to shift out of this physical state into something else. When you are in fight, flight, or freeze, the part of your brain that is activated is called your amygdala. And it's, I mean, I may be talking to some scientists here, so please pardon me if I'm telling you things that you could be telling me in much greater detail, but I'll do my best with my, English communications business background. But the amygdala regulates most of our sort of primal actions in the body. It's really important. That's why we still have it. The prefrontal cortex regulates rational decision-making, right? And when you're in fight, flight, or freeze, the prefrontal cortex tags out. When you're taking the GMAT, you need the prefrontal cortex tagged in. You need to make lots of rational decisions, right? And so taking those deep breaths, practicing mindfulness, period, strengthens the ability of the prefrontal cortex to talk to the amygdala and say, hey, let me do this, okay? Right? It strengthens that. So practicing, even on a nice Saturday like today, right? Just practicing a little mindfulness is like going to the gym on a day when you're not going to try to run a race or catch a bus or something like that, right? So you know that if any of you take a bus to get around your town, it's a lot easier to do that, to run for the bus that's leaving if you're in shape. If you're not, it's harder to do that. So practicing mindfulness on a regular basis makes it a lot easier to use it when you need it. Instead of just like, okay, let me take a couple deep breaths and see if this helps. It will, but if you do it on a regular basis, it's even easier for you to get to that place. But what I would do, Jaideep, to answer your question is, first of all, remind yourself that I'm okay. First thing you need to know, hey, that stress response I just felt is okay. Normal, totally normal, uneventful. This is okay. Take a deep breath, if not 3. And then what you're going to do is focus intently on something on that screen. A letter, a word, a number, anything, until it's the only thing you see. Because the only thing that you need to do is read. And that's it. You don't need to think about anything else. It doesn't actually matter if your first response to the comprehension section was that this is hard. We'll see. But that takes you out of, you're no longer reading when you're like, oh my gosh, this. The amygdala is fired up. Everything's like, you're no longer just reading. You could be reading and discovering. I wonder if it actually is challenging. It might not be, right? But it's all about focus. Just come back. And that's the non-judgmental piece of mindfulness is, doesn't matter. Maybe it's hard, maybe it isn't. Maybe I panicked, maybe I didn't. But these are just things that arise. The panic arises, it can be gone if we just let it go, instead of inviting it to stay with a story about how now it's going to win. The panic is going to win the GMAT, right? Like panic has taken over. No, panic is passing through. There's a beautiful quote from Pema Chodron, who's a mindfulness teacher with a really interesting life story. But she says, you are the sky and everything else is just the weather. Right. So even when it's storming and terrible, like the sky's still there, it's just behind the clouds. Some days you can see it, some days you can't, but it never changes. And that part of you that can see your panic and make a choice about, let me choose to take a breath here. Let me choose to remind myself, this GMAT is not going to hurt me. These letters on this page, on this screen cannot hurt me. And I'm going to choose to read instead. That's the sky. It's making that choice.
Thank you.
If nothing else, breathe deep.
Hey, Shannon.
I have one question. Oh, okay.
Okay. Parth, I think, was first, and then
Perfect.
part.
Appreciate it. And thank you so much for taking the time. And thank you, Avi, for setting this up. How can we use mindfulness to kind of increase our stamina during the exam?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have two answers. So there's two ways to lose stamina that I can think of during the exam. One of them is to lose focus, and the other is to actually get physically tired, right? And those two things can happen together. Maybe you're like, what's the difference, Shannon? But there is actually a difference. So we talked about if you're losing focus, that's one of the things you can do. Some of the things you can do, taking deep breaths, focusing on a single thing on the screen, a letter, a number, a word, until that's all that you see. Another thing that I talked about, I used the word grounding to talk about the lip gloss, but literally using the body, just like with the breath, take your hands and put them palms down on the table or down on your legs. Put your feet down on the floor. Feel your seat on the chair. So Victor and I talked about some of this stuff. Victor's like, I've heard this before, but stressful energy goes up and out, right? Like think about how it feels to be anxious. You're like up, right? The energy goes up and out and it's very light and kind of frazzled. Calming energy goes in and down. And so you've seen this, if you ever watch like a cop movie or a cop show or something where they're interrogating someone, the person, you'll see the person put their hands on the table when they're talking, right? Like trying to relax themselves. This is something you can do. Just bring your energy down, hands on the table, eyes still on the screen, hands on the table, hands on your lap, feet on the ground, right? So that you feel, you're reminded of this like super supportive energy that's holding you. The other thing though, about actually being physically tired is a bit different. There's breathing exercises that you can do for that. Those types of breathing exercises I would recommend not doing in the middle of a section. The same way you can take a couple deep breaths and nobody really notices. If you're in a testing center, it's not against the rules to take a deep breath unless you're like, but just breathe, right? There are some breathing exercises you can do, and we don't necessarily have to practice them today, but I can offer you some of the names to look up. But one of them, if you Google breath of fire, or those of you familiar with Sanskrit Kapalabhati breathing, it's very rapid breathing that you do using the core. And so, I mean, I'll demo without making you do it, but you put your hands on your belly and you take a normal breath. And what you're doing is working with forced exhales really fast. It's going to seem crazy, but it works. I'll just do 10 of them. Okay. So we're going to take a regular breath in and out. Then we're going to inhale, and I'm going to go for 10 forced exhales. What you're going to notice is that the inhale takes care of itself. The body's going to inhale anyway. So we inhale, we exhale, we inhale, and you can hear it. I'm going to seal my lips as I do this. Right. And you could see my body, the inhale. Every time I exhale, the next thing that happens is an inhale. Right. And so the traditional practice for that would be 30 of them, take a break, breathe, soften, do another 30, take a break, do another 30. This is the kind of thing you might be able to do in a quick like break between sections or something like that. But if any of you are trying this at home right now, or if you try it later, you feel it. It's like seltzer or like carbonation bubbles up here, because you're creating heat in the body to wake yourself up. Right. This is the kind of thing that you can do. You can also do, all of these are kind of crazy, by the way, but I've lost all sense of pride about worrying how I look doing these breaths. So I'm happy to show you. You can do bumblebee breath, which has a very similar effect. Again, I would not do this in the middle of an exam, but perhaps between sections. Inhale through the nose, and then the exhale is with the lips sealed. You're literally imitating the sound of a bumblebee. You're going to really feel that the vibration just echoes up into the, like right here between the eyes and the head. It's going to wake you up. And a third one is lion's breath. And this is a great one. I do this when I teach yoga. I make my students do it in downward facing dog because they can't see themselves or each other. But you inhale, when you exhale, you stick out your tongue. And just do that a bunch of times. Kids love that as well. If you have nieces or nephews or anything like that, try it. They'll love it. Those are a few different breathing exercises that you can do if actually just losing energy between the sections of the exam becomes an issue. Also, I'm a fan of sleep. I know it's very challenging when you're working and preparing for the GMAT, but sleep deprivation makes decision-making a challenge. Hopefully that answered your question. I think, is it
Surajit.
Strajit,
Yeah.
yes. And then Stefania.
Actually, after focusing for half an hour, after practicing in home, studying for half an hour, then my brain starts to distract from the studies to some comfortable things like pleasant things. So is it a signal that my brain got tired and I should give a rest to the brain, or should I just try to focus on the study, like coming out from this distraction to that study? So I'm confused that whether to give it a rest to the brain or to then forcefully concentrate my brain into that studies.
So if I understand, you're saying that after about 15 minutes of consistent practice or study, you feel yourself starting to get distracted. And that's really normal because again, the brain is trying to help you and is like, let me find other things for us to look at. Let me survey the environment just to make sure that we're safe and everything is still stable here. So that's really normal. I would say the first thing to try to do would be to again, we want to normalize that and be like, okay, my brain has wandered. That's okay. I would, in that state, take a deep breath and just focus like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and come back and use some of the focus exercises to try to bring yourself back to the simple question that's being asked. What am I being asked here? Focus as much as possible. What am I being asked? What am I being asked? Just coming back to that. I think that the deep breath can be a reset because our brains do need a break sometimes, but the GMAT doesn't allow for a lot of that. Knowing that you're going to get it soon, the break is coming in between the sections, and then eventually the thing will be over. Like this is not a forever thing. This is a few hours of an exam that will then be over, hopefully forever, right? But I think acknowledging that like, oh, I got distracted and that's okay. Let me take a deep breath and just focus on the breath. You can even close your eyes if you want to block out the next question so you're not engaged with that. And then come back, find the thing on the screen to bring your focus to and start again. And the great thing about mindfulness, sometimes I'll work with individuals. Typically, I recommend if you're just getting started that you do a practice that's between 5 and 10 minutes. And if you listen to any of the apps that are out there, recording, someone shared a recording in the chat, which is great. I have a bunch of free audio meditations on my website. They're all somewhere around 8 to 12 minutes long. It's very hard to sit in a mindfulness practice much longer than that, and you don't necessarily need to. You can if you enjoy it and you have the time, but it's normal to need a little bit of a break. The thing that we need to understand is it doesn't need to be a 5-minute break, right? We're in the middle of an exercise that requires endurance, that we keep going. And so we just come back, let go of story, let go of anything and just come back to the question. And don't worry, like notice if you're thinking, am I going to be okay now? Am I getting too tired? Am I this? Am I like, what is actually happening in the scope of this exam? Swipe and let it go. Doesn't matter. The only thing that's actually happening is the question on the screen.
Thank you.
Yes, of course. Stefania.
Hi, thank you so much for for the information that you are giving us and teaching us. Well, you know, I really feel very identified with what you're saying because I took a mock maybe each time that I'm going to take a mock, I really freak out and I go to the mock like thinking on all the theory that I have learned and the exercises. And then when I go to the mock, I don't know, I freak out. And the last time that I did a mock, that I took a mock, before starting, I thought, okay, I won't lose myself again. I will try to have control. And I just forgot about all the theory. I just wanted to focus and try to be comfortable and relaxed. And actually it did work very well for me. I didn't know it was mindfulness, maybe kind of somehow. But what happened to me is that when I was dealing with the exams, you know, those thoughts about what if I don't get this right? What if I don't get into the MBA? What they started to come, but I said, okay, I want to allow them to come. Okay, try to block them and continue. And I stopped maybe 3 times to close my eyes and breathe and continue. And it's the best mode that I have taken. Yes, but at least, you know, in the quant section, but something that happened to me that maybe is what I want to ask you is that when I stopped for my break and I came back, but I was calm to the verbal section. And I know that I know the questions, but it was like my brain could not connect with the section, as if I could not get engaged with the content. So I don't know if the exercises that you said could help me to do that, or if there are some exercises that you suggest to do maybe just exactly before the exam, maybe, and also through the day. Because yes, I even had a panic attack the other day, like thinking about what if I don't get this, what if, and the time and effort, you know, these are difficult times. So I don't know, what can we do in the day, every day, so that you could be, I don't know, more stable, maybe more equilibrated. If I don't know, maybe the source that you said about your website, it's okay, it's enough, maybe.
Yeah, no, I think you've asked a few really great questions there. And I think, first of all, you talked about doing things, what can we do every day? Any type of time set aside for mindfulness. And that can be in the form of sitting and doing breath work, listening to a meditation from any of the apps that are out there, any of the links, you know, my website or another, whatever. Setting aside that time and committing to stay in it, no matter what happens, right? No matter how distracted. And some days, like, practicing meditation is not like a straight line to success. It's like, oh, some days I'm very distracted. It's very hard to sit still. Other days, the time goes by like this. And I'm like, well, where did that go? Did I fall asleep? You know, what happened, right? The practice is simply the showing up part. Whatever happens when you're there is secondary. But creating a habit of this, eventually you start to become familiar with what it is like to actually just sit with yourself, to not be looking at your phone, to not be listening to a podcast, to not be in a crowded room, right? To not be seeking distraction, but to just sit with yourself. And as things come up, you just allow them to come up. That is the practice for being in the moment when you are taking the exam and something comes up. You're familiar with being in that space and recognizing, like, you know how it feels to actually allow your feelings instead of being like, no, I'm not allowed to be scared. I'm not allowed to be challenged. I'm not allowed to, like, you are. When you allow it, it comes, it goes through, and it leaves. That's what it wants to do. And you do that by shifting your focus away from it. So this is the mindfulness part, right? When we notice, like, oh, I'm having a physical experience of anxiety, of panic, of fear, of whatever, come back to the screen, take a breath, and look at what's actually in front of you. Because what you're thinking of is not actually happening, right? It's the same as, you know, we watch scary movies or dramatic movies, and we have emotions about them. Even though we're not there, it's not happening, right? You can be very scared about something that's happening in a scary movie, and you can be sweating and all the things are happening as if you're there, but you're not. We can do that with the stories that we play in our mind as well. And the key is to, you know, the same way that you can turn that movie off and be like, whew, okay, that's not real. Let me try to shake that off. The thought about what if is not real either. It's a movie. You know, it's never happened. And nobody said it's actually going to happen. It's just an idea. It's a creation. And so I think recognizing that, doing the practice of sitting with yourself and allowing that to happen about things other than the GMAT. You might be worried about other things. You might have a day where you have a presentation to give or something going on that you're like, okay, I'm just going to sit with this and I'm going to let it be there. And I'm going to come back to my breath or my object that I'm sitting with as my focal point, or my yoga practice, or whatever it is. I mean, there's so many exercises. I could spend the rest of the day talking about different mindfulness exercises with you all. I'm just going to do this no matter how it feels and no matter what else comes up. You're training your brain in a very real way, increasing gray matter in your brain and making it easier for you to come back to your focus when things happen during the exam, whether it's internal or external. And it sounds like you did a wonderful job in that last mock that you did when you were able to use your breath to come back to center. You know, and I love you talked about like just taking the thoughts and pushing them out, right? It's like you have this protected space around you that's all just, it's all clarity, it's all ease, it's just space. It's just you doing this exercise with the GMAT, which is actually just a computer game that you've played a million times before, right? It's you just getting to do that, and the rest of the world has to wait. Nothing else gets to come in. You know, like the analogy that I use a lot is when you're listening to something with your AirPods or your earbuds or whatever, it's like right here. And with mindfulness, like if that's your thoughts, we just pull them out. It's still there, but we're no longer paying attention to it. We're paying attention to something else. You know, in Santo Domingo, it's the incredible traffic everywhere. Close the door to the balcony. It's still out there, but it's much different, you know, when the door's closed and the curtain's pulled, and I choose to be in here doing this instead of like, what's going on out there? I hear an ambulance. Is everything okay? It's out there. It's not what I'm doing right now. You know, I'm doing this. Doesn't change what's happening. It changes how I experience it. And you do that by coming back. An ambulance goes by, I'm going to be like, oh, and then I'm like, oh no, wait, I'm doing this. It's normal for me to get distracted by that, but then I come back, right? And the coming back is where your power is. The fact that you can notice, and instead of saying, oh, I got distracted again. I always get distracted. I bet this exam is going to go very bad. You're just like, oh, distracted. Let me come back. Let me find something in front of me to ground me and just move forward. I'm not sure if that helps.
Jump in and add a point here with regards to what JD was asking, and also Nicole in the chat, about how to handle a situation where I'm panicking because the question is too hard. I'm panicking because I read this RC passage and couldn't understand what it's talking about. I want to share with you all what I do when that happens. Yes, it does happen to me as well, where I get a question that's just way over my head and I just don't know how to approach it. I have a very cocky attitude on the GMAT. My attitude is that if I can't figure my way through this question, it's like, good job, you guys. You did it. You managed to write a question that's too hard for me. And it doesn't matter if that's true or not. For all I know, it's a really easy question and I'm just not seeing it, but that's irrelevant. It's not useful for me to know whether it's truly an incredibly hard question or it's actually an easy question that I think is hard. That's totally irrelevant, so why even think about it? So I think that this is an attitude that's very useful especially on adaptive tests, right? The better I do, the harder the question will be. So I'm actually going in there hoping for the very thing that you all are panicking about. Like the exact same thing that's causing you to panic, I'm hoping that will happen to me, because that's the indication that I'm doing well, right? Because I want the difficulty level to increase. I'm hoping to get something that for other people would cause panic, but for me is a confirmation that things are going well. And so I think that's called reframing, right, Shannon? Where it's like if you hear an ambulance and you think that ambulance is coming for you, because I guess it's better analogy is with a police car. If you think the police is coming to arrest you, then you interpret the sound of the siren very differently from if you're being robbed and you hear a police siren, right? And then you're happy to hear it. So it's exactly the same sound, but the framing around that sound makes your reaction to it very different. So I'll shut up there. I just wanted to share that.
No, I think you also make a
Go for it.
No, please.
Yeah,
I was saying thanks. Yeah.
you make a good point with the just like practicing this in other forms of your life, or no, you were mentioning like meditation or mindfulness when giving a presentation. These jobs that you're going to get after an MBA are going to be, a lot of them are probably high stress, and cultivating this mindfulness is good, and one could argue that's also what the GMAT is testing. If you're able to be calm and do still thrive under pressure. So maybe that's why they make these adaptive tests, so it naturally, by design, gets you stressed out easier. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I think decision making is a huge part of the GMAT. And I know that each of you sitting here has all the knowledge that you need to get an incredibly high score on the exam right now. The question is just, do you allow it? Do you allow your brain to use it? And I think we were at the beginning of the session, Avi was talking about individuals who will raise their score 1 to sometimes 200 points in a very short amount of time without really doing any significant prep in between. And I couldn't smile big enough there. Those are my favorite stories, and I have plenty of them from the years of coaching. And it's when you get out of your own way, and a little bit of that has to be the realization that you are okay, that you are not in danger in this exam, that this exam cannot hurt you in any real way, and that no matter what happens, you're going to be all right. And that's kind of a radical idea, because I know right now we're all like, business school, like get me into business school, get me in this year, preferably get me into one of my top 2 or 3 choices, right? Like these are the goals. What if, and I've walked through this again, this may be old news to some people, but what if you were going to be okay regardless, right? And I'm not suggesting you abandon your goals. I'm not suggesting you don't apply to the schools I'm not suggesting any of that. Keep going. But what if you knew that it kind of didn't actually matter, and that things were going to work out perfectly for you, regardless of how it goes? Avi used the word cocky, a little bit cocky with the GMAT. Part of that's because he's super prepared, but so are you, right? But the cockiness of like, things are going to work out for me, regardless of this, hands down, every single time. That is the person who contacts me and is like, coach, you're not going to believe what happened. I went in one more time. I didn't tell anybody I was taking it, or I didn't think I was going to have time to take it. A slot opened up at the testing center, whatever. And I was like, what have I got to lose? And I went up 100 points. I went up, 200 points. It's when you realize, you remember that you are an incredibly strong applicant to business school. If you're on this call, you take this seriously enough that you are prepared in all areas of your candidacy. I'm quite sure of it. You're an incredibly strong applicant to business school. And I challenge anyone in the world to know, besides Avi, maybe, to know more about the GMAT than you do at this point. Like, you need to walk in there like you own the place, as my grandmother would say. You could not possibly be more prepared. So like, just do it. Those are the people you ever watch in the US in basketball. Sometimes they'll invite somebody down to the middle of the court and just be like, hey, if you can make this basket from the middle of the court, you win a car or something like that. And they're just like, I'm not going to make this. And then whoop, there it goes, like straight into the basket, because they're like, doesn't matter. And it just works, right? In a lot of spaces, that's what's called flow. You let the energy go, you just let it do its work, and you get out of the way. I worked with a woman once who lived across the street from the testing center. And we talked about how, like, every day, like from her house, she could see it out the curtain. She's like, it's taunting me. It's, taunting me in my sleep. I can't even, like, it was just constant anxiety. And so we worked with that. And this is what I do in individual coaching, right? There's advice that everyone can benefit from, but sometimes we really get into it. Like, what do you think is going on over there? What is the testing center doing to you? And eventually she called me, and she went from a 510 to a 710 from one exam to the next. I mean, she was brilliant, and she just could not get over the story that this was like a torture chamber across the street from her, instead of like, oh, how convenient. It's right there. There's no traffic to get there. It's gonna be so easy to get there and just like be there and do the same thing you're doing all the time. It's amazing how we can get in our own way.
I'm a big fan of telling students to go to the test center on a regular basis before their actual exam, just to say hi to the people who work there. I mean, on your point of walking in like you own the place, that's hard to do if you're walking in there for the first time. But if you go there every other day and you know the people who work there, and, you know, I like to like walk in there with a cup of coffee just to say hi and look at the miserable faces of the students coming out of the test and offer them my services. No, I'm joking, but that's, I think that makes it a lot less of a big deal on test day. Like whatever we can do to make it not feel like a big deal, we should. I think, right? So I had one student once who really had a lot of test anxiety, and I actually told him to go to the test center every Saturday for 8 Saturdays in a row before his actual test, which was also a Saturday. So basically I told him every Saturday for 2 months, you're going to pretend that it's test day. You're going to have the same breakfast. You're going to gather your, you know, the documents that you need and stuff like that. You're going to go to the test center. You're going to say hi. Nope, not taking the test today, just visiting. Just wanted to say hi, checking in on you. And then go down to the cafe at the bottom of the building and do a practice set or something like that. And that really worked for him. He actually went to Harvard Business School after that. So it was a huge difference on his performance just from, he didn't do any studying over those 2 months other than maybe that one little practice set each Saturday when he got there. But that was one thing I wanted to offer there. And then the other thing is an anecdote from a student of a former colleague of mine who, some of you may have already heard this, I'm not sure. He went to the test center. He was a brilliant guy, was going to do really well, and was waiting to get called into the computer room. He was on Facebook, as one does, while waiting for something. And then he saw that his ex-girlfriend just got engaged. And right after he saw that, he got called in to do his test, and he got a 470. And he went back a couple of weeks later and got a 740. So it just goes to show the difference that that your mindset can make on your performance on this test. So
Absolutely,
it's definitely real.
It is absolutely true, and it is sometimes I'll work with people who say, well, you know, last time I got a 650 and I feel like it was a fluke. I'm not really that good or whatever. And like the GMAT is way too smart for that. It's not possible to score better than you can actually score. It is definitely possible to score below your capabilities, right? And so practice exams, I think, are sometimes a little bit higher, but that's for mindset reasons too. But you know, there's no reason if you're getting 700s on your practice exams and 500s when you go into the testing center, you're getting 700s. You are someone who's getting a 700, right? It's just a question of executing on that. And that is all just allowing it to happen. And all these exercises are really a path to that, to allowing yourself to do what you can already do in a way that counts.
It's more or less time for us to wrap out. I'm sorry, Victor. I want to ask Shannon one more question. And also, Shannon, if you wouldn't mind putting in the chat how people can get in touch with you or your website or something like that, in case people wanted to follow up. But I wanted to ask Shannon one last question. And then if Shannon doesn't have to rush off, Victor, you can ask yours as well. Shannon, what do you think about people who say, I need to bring my notes with me to go over them at the test center right before I go in, and I feel like that's going to alleviate my anxiety if I am able to go over my notes right before I get called into the computer room? What's your reaction to that?
Well, I mean, my gut reaction is no. And this kind of aligns with one of the questions being asked in the chat, which was probably intentional, Avi, about what can we do in between. My first reaction to that question was nothing to do with the GMAT. Breathe, you know, do things you're allowed to do that don't have to do with the GMAT. And I would say the same thing. You know, if it makes you feel better to have your notes with you in some way that is permitted, that you can then kind of put away before you go in there, fine. But I would encourage you to not look at them. you already know. You already know what you need to know. And again, I would say the same in the time leading up to the exam. Don't do a practice exam the day before your real exam. Like if anybody here has ever done like a marathon or a half marathon or something, you taper in the week before your race. And by the time you get to the race, you barely ran for the past few days, if not mostly for that week, because you need your energy, you need your clarity, you don't need to be worn down. This is not
all the time. Marathon
perfect.
analogy. Yeah.
This is not like a quiz, like a history quiz in college. You already have the knowledge you need. It's a decision-making exam. You need your decision-making muscles to be rested.
Bringing your notes with you to the test makes me think of a person who's going in for a tennis match, maybe in the US Open or something like a very high-level tennis match, bringing with him his notes of, if the ball comes into my right, I'm going to use my forehand. If it comes into my left, I'm going to use my backhand. If the ball falls close to the net, I have to remember to run forward so that I can reach the ball that's close to the net. But if the ball goes up and behind me, then I have to run backwards as fast as possible. Like, those would be the notes. And can you imagine that world-class tennis player going over those notes in the minutes before the match begins? I see a lot of you smiling and thinking that's a ridiculous analogy, but to me, they're identical. I can't imagine what on earth I would have on my notes going into the test center. So I just wanted to put out there, and I use that analogy on purpose because it is ridiculous, but so is bringing your notes with you to the test center. They're equally ridiculous. I'll just say thank you so much, Shannon, for your time today and for joining us. If you don't have to rush off, I think Victor wanted to ask or say something as well. But
sure. Yeah, I'm
thank you so
happy to
much.
stay. It's been my pleasure. Thank you all for listening and letting me. I have so much I want to say that sometimes it's hard for me to figure out where to start, but thank you. And yes, Victor, I'm happy to take your question.
Hi, Shannon. Thank you so much. My question is like how, it's actually, I would wonder if you could elaborate a little bit on the imposter syndrome, because I think a lot of the insecurity, a lot of like the panicking inside the test is like whenever like, and we do have different performances throughout our mocks, and then we tend to think like, okay, when I underperform, it's my real score. When I overperform, was a lucky shot. I think, by the way, that in the forum, Quant Reasoning, I think was JD who posted like, is the third test of MBA.com, the third mock, easier because I got a higher score? So, and I resonate with that because I tend to think, okay, it has to be easier because I did not improve or I did not do something different. I tend to go to the lower part of the spectrum of possibilities. And if you could elaborate a little bit on imposter syndrome and how to tackle that in general.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so imposter syndrome is a story. It's a story that you don't belong in a place where you have brought yourself, right? That you have decided, I want to pursue an MBA. Therefore, I'm choosing to take the GMAT. And somehow I'm wrong in making that choice. It's not the right choice for me. And that's just not true, right? And the idea that everybody else is somehow better qualified is also not true. And I can say that with firm authority, having been on the other side of the table for over 10 years. There really isn't a such thing as an admissions mistake, especially when it comes to things like GMAT scores and whatnot, right? Like that you wouldn't be in this conversation if it isn't where you belonged. You have earned your way here. Right? If you knew that an MBA wasn't for you, you wouldn't be at the GMAT table, but you are, right? But you are. And ultimately, the root of imposter syndrome is self-worth, right? Is whether you think that you are valuable enough to be there and that you belong at the table. And the question is, if you go to business school, are you going to do your best there? Are you going to show up every day and try to add value to the conversations? You're going to study hard and try to do well in different metrics and so forth? Of course. Then you belong there. That's all you can do is do your best. Are you going to allow yourself to not thrive at business school? Of course not. So you belong here. That's it. You do the same thing on the GMAT, right? You know, I think there are people, I say this to the individuals I coach, there are people in this world who think that business school is just their birthright. And their dad went, their mom went, their whoever went, their name is on the building, whatever. And they're just like, yeah, probably I'll go there. And they like sort of try. And for whatever reason, they end up there. And those people are not as smart as you, and they're not as prepared as you, and they're not as ready to thrive in that business school as you are. So if they can do it, so can you. Certainly. Right? That's just the truth of the world. You have worked really hard to be where you are, and you have a 100% success rate of surviving hard things so far. Right? You can do this too. It's just another thing that doesn't have to be any harder than it actually is. It's something you do all the time, right? The tennis analogy is fantastic, because how many hours has that tennis player practiced? And then all of a sudden they're afraid to get on a court. You know, there's this thing in sports that you hear talked about, the home field advantage, you know, that the home team has the advantage because it's their home field, their home pitch, their home court, whatever it is. But in sports, there's regulation on how long the lines are, how big the field is. Like, they're all the same. They're all the same. The home one is not better than the away one. But in their minds, oh, this is where we win, right? So what if every GMAT is your home GMAT, right? What if every testing center, what if it's just like, hey, it's the same thing everywhere? If it's the same thing everywhere, then it's the same when you practice as when you mock, as when you take the official. Same game. Doesn't matter where you're sitting, it's regulation, right? I don't know if that answered your question or not. I kind of rambled a little bit.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And I love the analogy with the away and home team.
Yeah.
Yes.
It shows up in sports.
I think in the context of GMAT, the imposter syndrome often comes from a place of, I'm not a numbers guy. And I think people don't realize that numbers guy is not something that you're either born with or without. It's something that you can learn. You can become a numbers guy. And I mean, if I had to kind of describe what we do here at quantreasoning.com in one sentence, I would say we create numbers guys. And I don't know if that's sexist. I'm not sure if guys can be, if you can use that for women or not, but I'll say create numbers people. How about that? That's what we do, right? So you come here, maybe you're not a numbers guy, maybe you are a numbers guy, you just don't know that you're a numbers guy. But after a while, guess what? Now you are a numbers guy. And in many ways, I think my cocky attitude is the exact opposite of imposter syndrome. And the funny thing about it is I don't even know for sure that it's a hard question that I'm looking at. For all I know, it is an easy question, but to me it's hard, therefore it's hard. And that's that cocky attitude, but it's exactly the opposite of imposter syndrome.
Exactly. I love that. Yeah. Imposter syndrome shows up in lots of places. Again, I think it was Eric that was saying, like, hey, this is going to show up in school, it's going to show up in work, it's going to show up all over the place, until you start realizing that it's just another one of those things, like stories, that's trying to buy its way in. And you can be like, that's not true. It's just not true.
There's such a funny scene in, I think the movie is called Central Intelligence, with The Rock and Dwayne Johnson and I forget the other guy's name, but basically in the premise of the story is that Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, if you don't know him, he's a giant bodybuilder, ex-wrestler guy. In his childhood, he was supposedly a fat kid, and he was being bullied in school and all that kind of stuff. And so there's this really powerful scene where you see this big bodybuilder, muscular guy looking in the mirror, and the reflection is looking back at him, and it's this chubby little kid from his childhood. That's what he sees when he looks in the mirror. Nobody else sees it when they look at him, but he still sees that. And I think for a lot of us, that's what happens when we walk into that test center, regardless of how much, I mean, in his case, the other character in the movie asks him, oh, how did this happen? Because he hadn't seen him in 20 years, like since he was a kid. And he said, oh, it was actually really easy. I just spent 8 hours a day, every day, 7 days a week, for 20 years at the gym. And that's how that happened, right? But that's what a lot of us are doing for the GMAT. But then we go to the test center and we look in the mirror and we're still seeing our reflection from before we started studying. But we got to get over that. And I don't know how to get over that. But that's why we had Shannon here today. I think those are all the tools that can help us get over that.
The present moment is that he is not the fat kid. Like, the truth in the present moment is that you're ready. You're prepared. You're some of the most prepared individuals on earth for this exam. So just go do it, breathe through it, let it pass, and then put it in your rearview mirror forever. But if I could leave you with one thing today, it would be to understand the power of your breath, and that just as you are wired for fight, flight, and freeze, when you are actually in physical danger, you are wired to calm yourself. You have the power to override that messaging simply by taking deep breaths and focusing your gaze in a particular direction. And that as often as you need to, you can do it again and do it again and do it again. That's what it's there for. You're not messing it up. You're not doing a bad job. If you have to do it repeatedly, it is repeatedly available to you for as long as you live. And that power is yours, Oh, perfect. That's amazing.
That's the one. And you see what it says
Yes.
there, right? The power of whatever. I'll put a link to this. The power of self-image, right? The power of self-image. Once a fat kid, always a fat kid.
Yeah.
Once not a numbers guy, always not a numbers guy.
It's just not true. Yeah. Thank you all so much for your great questions and just for allowing me into this space with you. If I can support you in any way, please reach out to me and let me know at any point along your journey. And please just give it a shot, grab one of those apps, grab some of the meditations on my website or whatever, and just try and know that there's no such thing as doing it wrong. If you're doing it perfectly, no matter what comes up.
Much appreciated. Thank you so much, Shannon. Thank you, everyone. I'll see some of you tomorrow, the rest of you next Saturday. A reminder, no AMA on Christmas Day and New Year's Day. So next Saturday is our last one for the year. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend, and I will see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. Thank you, Avi.
Thank you, Shannon. Thank you, Avi.
Thank you.